Welcome to the channel, everyone. I hope you enjoy the stories, and thank you for listening. The open road never bothered Grant Weaver. He'd been a trucker for 15 years, driving everything from box trucks to 18-wheelers, and there was something comforting about the hum of the engine and the endless stretch of highway. A born and raised Texan, Grant took pride in hauling heavy loads across the country, rain or shine, but the night he rolled through the dense forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula was one he'd never forget. Grant had picked up a load of industrial equipment in Houston and was heading to a manufacturing plant near Marquette. The route was straightforward, Interstate 75 up through Ohio, then cutting across the Michigan's pine-covered back roads. By the time he hit the two-lane highways of the Upper Peninsula, the December sky was pitch black, the stars obscured by a thick blanket of clouds. The road was lonely, lined by towering pines that seemed to close in the farther he drove. A light snow had begun to fall, and his rig's headlights barely cut through the flurries. Grant switched off the radio, the static too grating, and focused on the rhythm of his wipers against the windshield. Then he saw it, a figure darting across the road, too fast for him to react. He slammed on the brakes, the air brakes hissing as the truck lurched forward. The trailer behind him groaned as he came to a stop, and Grant sat frozen for a moment, his hands gripping the wheel, his pulse hammered in his ears. It wasn't a deer, too big, too fast, and something about the way it moved made his skin crawl. Grant reached for his flashlight, a heavy-duty maglite he kept tucked under the passenger seat. His boots crunched against the packed snow as he stepped out, his breath puffing in the cold air. The forest was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that felt unnatural. He shone the beam along the road, but saw nothing, no tracks, no sign of an animal. "Damn thing must have bolted," he muttered, though the thought didn't comfort him. As he climbed back into the cab, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He checked his mirrors, scanning the dark tree line. Nothing, just the ghostly white of the snow and the black void of the forest. Shaking his head, he put the truck back in gear and rolled on, the incident nagging at the edge of his mind. A few miles down the road, his CB radio crackled to life. A low, garbled voice broke through the static, the words too distorted to make out. Grant frowned and adjusted the dial. "Breaker 19, this is Weaver. Anybody out there?" No response, just static. Then faintly, the same garbled voice returned. It sent a chill down his spine, and he quickly turned the CB off. And the snow was falling heavier now, coating the road in a slick layer. Grant slowed his speed, his hands tight on the wheel. The unease from earlier hadn't left him. If anything, it had grown, a gnawing sense of dread that seemed to thicken with the dark. That's when he saw it again, this time in the side mirror, a shadow darting between the trees, keeping pace with his truck. It moved on all fours, but there was something off about its gait, something too deliberate, too intelligent. Grant's mouth went dry. He pressed harder on the gas, the engine roaring as the truck picked up speed. The shadow followed. He glanced in the mirror again, and that's when he saw its eyes, yellow glowing, locked onto him like twin lanterns in the night. They were too high off the ground to belong to any animal he could think of, and the shape, it wasn't a bear, and it sure as hell wasn't a wolf. "Christ," he muttered, his throat tight. The thing moved closer, darting in and out of the trees with unnatural speed. Grant could see more of it now, hulking figure, covered in dark matted fur. Its head was canine, with long pointed ears and a muzzle full of sharp teeth that glinted in the light of his tail light. But its limbs were wrong. The way it moved was too human. Panic surged in Grant's chest. He floored the gas, the truck's engine roaring as it barreled down the icy road. The creature didn't falter, didn't slow. It was toying with him, staying just at the edge of his vision. Grant's breath came in short gasps as he gripped the wheel. He didn't believe in cryptids or monsters. Those were stories told around campfires, exaggerated for effect. But this thing, this was real, and it was hunting him. Up ahead the road curved sharply, disappearing into the forest. Grant eased off the gas, knowing he couldn't risk skidding. The moment he slowed, the creature lunged. A deafening thud shook the truck as the thing slammed into the side of the trailer. Grant fought to keep control, the wheels skidding off the slick road. He glanced in the side mirror and saw it clinging to the metal, its claws digging deep into the steel. Its face was inches from the glass, lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed rows of jagged teeth. Grant grabbed the maglite from the dash and swung it at the window, hoping to startle the beast. The creature let out a guttural growl, its breath fogging the glass. With a final swing, the flashlight connected with the pane, cracking it. The sound seemed to spook the thing, and it dropped back into the snow. Heart pounding, Grant didn't slow down. He drove for miles, not daring to stop until he reached the dim glow of a gas station on the outskirts of a small town. He pulled into the lot, his hands shaking as he killed the engine. The attendant inside gave him a curious look as he stumbled out of the cab, pale and sweating. "You alright there, buddy?" the man asked. Grant didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was still racing, the image of those glowing eyes burned into his memory. He stayed in that gas station for hours, too afraid to get back on the road. When he finally did, it was daylight, and the forest didn't seem quite so menacing. But Grant knew he hadn't imagined it. Whatever that thing was, it was out there, lurking in the woods, waiting for its next victim, and he'd never look at the road the same way again. My name is Pete Lawson. I'm a trucker out of Springfield, Missouri, and I've been driving rigs long enough to know the road can hold more secrets than the miles reveal. I've hauled livestock, lumber, machinery, you name it, across more states that I can count. But there's one trip I'll never forget, not because of the load or the destination, but because of what found me on the dark highway outside the Baraga County, Michigan. It was late February, and I'd been tasked with delivering a load of construction materials to a job site in northern Wisconsin. My route took me up through Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where the snow had turned the world into a frozen wasteland. The roads were clear enough for driving, but the forests on either side looked like something out of postcard, if you ignored how quiet they were. Too quiet. The trip started without a hitch. I kept the radio on to drown out the monotony of the hum of the engine. The dispatcher's voice came through occasionally, giving updates or warnings about road conditions, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I'd made this drive a dozen times before and thought it wasn't my favorite stretch of highway. I didn't expect anything unusual. Around 10 p.m., the snow started falling heavier. The sky was a thick gray blanket, smothering the stars, and the road was practically empty. My headlights cut through the storm in short, feeble beams. I flipped on the high beams, but they didn't help much. My GPS said I had another 3 hours to go, and I was debating whether to push through or pull over when I saw something on the side of the road. At first I thought it was a deer. Michigan's full of them, and I've had my share of close calls with wildlife. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was standing upright. A man maybe, but no man should be out here in this winter, not without a vehicle or some kind of gear. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, hunched slightly, as if waiting. Its silhouette was off too tall, too broad, with arms that hung too long at its sides. My stomach knotted as I slowed the rig, the tires crunching against the icy road. When I was within about 50 feet, my headlights caught its eyes. They reflected like an animal's, but brighter, too bright, yellow and piercing. They looked onto me like twin searchlights. The thing tilted its head as if curious, and that's when I saw its face, or at least what I could make out of it. It was canine, long snout, pointed ears, but something about it was disturbingly human. The fur around its mouth was matted, dark, with something I didn't want to think about. I slammed on the brakes, instinct taking over. The truck lurched to a stop, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The figure didn't flinch. It didn't run. It just stood there, staring as if deciding what to do next. I don't know how long I sat there, staring back. Time seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging like hours. Finally, I fumbled for the air horn and blasted it. The sound shattered the silence, echoing through the trees. The thing twitched, took a step forward, then stopped. That's when I noticed its hands, clawed, massive, and far too dexterous for any animal I'd ever seen. They twitched, as if eager to grab something, to grab me. Hell no, I muttered, slamming the truck into gear. The tire spun briefly on the icy road before catching, and I floored it. The creature moved then, darting off into the trees faster than anything that size should be able to move. For a moment, I thought I was safe. I told myself it was just some freak animal, maybe a wolf with mange, or a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. My eyes darted to the mirrors, scanning the tree line, but I saw nothing. I was wrong. About a mile down the road, something hit the side of the trailer. Hard, the whole rig shuddered, and I fought to keep control. I glanced in the side mirrors and caught a glimpse of it, running on all fours. Now its body a blur of dark fur and muscle. Its claws raked against the metal, leaving deep gouges. Jesus Christ, I hissed, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The thing was toying with me, lunging at the trailer and retreating, its glowing eyes never leaving the cab. I knew I couldn't outrun it, not on these icy roads. My only chance was to reach a populated area, somewhere with lights and people. But the nearest town was miles away, and the thing wasn't giving up. It jumped onto the back of the trailer, its claws screeching against the metal as it climbed. I could feel the weight of it, the way it made the truck sway slightly. My mind raced. I had a tire iron in the cab, a knife in my toolbox, but what good would they do against something like this? Then, as suddenly as it started, the attack stopped, the weight disappeared, and the truck steadied. I glanced in the mirror but saw nothing. The road ahead was clear, the snow still falling in the thick lazy flakes. For a moment I thought maybe it was over, maybe the thing had lost interest. But then I heard it, a low growl, so deep it vibrated through the cab. It was on the roof. My heart nearly stopped. I slammed on the brakes, sending the truck skidding to a halt. The growl turned into a snarl, and I heard the sound of claws scraping against metal as it lost its footing and slid off the side. I didn't wait to see if it was hurt. I threw the truck into gear and tore down the road, not caring about the icy conditions. My only thought was to get as far away as possible. By the time I reached the light of a gas station on the outskirts of Baraga, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely shift into park. I stumbled into the station, mumbling something about an animal attack. The clerk gave me a strange look, but didn't ask questions. I stayed there until dawn, too afraid to go back out. When I finally did, I found the side of the trailer shredded, the metal bent and twisted like it was made of tinfoil. There were tracks in the snow, massive, clawed, and bipedal, that led back into the woods. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe it was the dogman people talk about in these parts. Maybe it was something worse. And all I know is I'll never drive through Michigan's Upper Peninsula at night again. Some roads are better left unexplored. I'm Daryl Mercer, a long-haul trucker out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Been driving rigs for over 15 years, and in all that time, I've seen some weird things on the road. Drunks staggering into traffic, UFO sightings, even a guy walking down the highway wearing nothing but cowboy boots and a sombrero. But nothing, and I mean nothing, comes close to what happened to me last winter in the dense backwoods of West Virginia. I just finished a delivery to Charleston and was headed west, hauling a full load of steel beams to a construction site in Indiana. My dispatcher had warned me about the weather. Blizzards were moving in, but I figured I could beat the worst of it if I stuck to the highways. That plan went out the window when I hit a road closure. A bad wreck had shut down the interstate, and I was forced to detour onto back roads near the Monongahela National Forest. It was already late, past 10 p.m., and the snow was coming down hard. My wipers were working overtime, and the road was barely visible under a blanket of fresh powder. My CB radio crackled now and then with chatter from other drivers, but out here the voices were few and far between. The isolation pressed in, the forest on either side of the narrow road looming like black walls. My headlights barely made a dent in the darkness. About an hour into the detour, I noticed something odd. The woods were too quiet, no rustling branches, no distant howls, not even the whistle of the wind. Just the hum of my engine and the crunch of snow under my tires. It put me on edge, like I was driving through a cemetery instead of a forest. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, something large and dark, crossing the road about 50 yards ahead. It moved fast, faster than any animal that size should be able to. My first thought was a bear, but it was upright, and its gait was all wrong. Bears don't move like that, they lumber. This thing glided, its long limbs cutting through the snow like it wasn't even there. I slowed the rig, my pulse quickening, my eyes locked on the spot where it had disappeared into the trees. The snow was coming down harder now, but I could just make out a faint disturbance in the underbrush, like something big had pushed through. I should have kept driving. I should have chalked it up to a fatigue and let it go, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled the truck to a stop and grabbed my flashlight. Stupid, I know, but I had to see what it was. The snow crunched under my boots as I stepped out in the freezing air. The beam of my flashlight cut through the night, illuminating the jagged branches and thick undergrowth. I followed the tracks, massive prints, far too big for any animal I knew, with claws that dug deep into the frozen ground. They led into the woods, disappearing into the shadows. That's when I heard it, a low growl, so deep it vibrated in my chest. My flashlight wavered as my hand started to shake. The growl came again, closer this time, and then I saw them. Eyes, yellow, glowing eyes, staring at me from the darkness. The thing stepped forward, just enough for the light to catch its outline. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with a lean, muscular frame covered in dark, matted fur. Its head unmistakably canine, a long snout, pointed ears, but its posture was all wrong. It stood like a man, its shoulders hunched and its long arms hanging low. For a moment neither of us moved. Then it bared its teeth, sharp, jagged things that glistened in the light, and let out a snarl that made every hair on my body stand on end. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I bolted back to the truck, slipping and stumbling in the snow. I could hear it behind me, its heavy footfalls crunching closer, its growls turning into a full-blown roar. I barely made it to the cab, slamming the door shut just as it reached the edge of the road. The rig shook as the creature slammed into the side, its claws scraping against the metal. I threw the truck in gear, the tires spinning before finally catching traction. The beast chased me, its massive form illuminated in the side mirrors. It was fast, too fast, but the truck was faster. I roared down the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. For a while I thought I'd lost it. The road stretched out ahead, empty and endless, and the forest began to thin. But then the rig jolted violently, the rear axle bucking as if I'd hit something. The trailer's weight shifted, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the thing was back. It had jumped onto the trailer. The CB radio crackled to life, a voice breaking through the static. "You okay out there, driver? You're moving like a bat out of hell." I grabbed the mic, my voice trembling. "Something's after me, big, don't know what, it's on my trailer." The silence that followed was worse than any reply. Then the voice came back, softer this time. "Keep driving, don't stop. They say there's things out here, things you don't want to meet." I didn't need to be told twice. I floored it, the engine roaring as the truck barreled down the icy road. The creature clung to the trailer, its claws gouging deep into the steel. I could hear it snarling, could feel its weight pulling at the rig. Desperation took over. I swerved violently, trying to shake it loose. The trailer fishtailed, and for a terrifying moment I thought I'd lose control. but the beast finally lost its grip, tumbling off into the snow. I didn't stop, not until I reached a truck stop on the edge of a small town. I parked under the bright lights and sat there for a long time, my hands still gripping the wheel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I finally got out to inspect the trailer, my worst fears were confirmed. The metal was shredded, deep claw marks running the length of it. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't just some wild animal. I heard stories since then about the dogman, half wolf, half man, a predator that stalks the forests of the Midwest. I don't know if that's what I saw, and honestly, I don't care to find out. All I know is I'll never take another back road through West Virginia, no matter how bad the traffic gets. Some things aren't worth the shortcut. My name's Travis Haugen. I've been a trucker out of Billings, Montana for close to 2 decades now. Long hauls, night drives, blizzards, breakdowns, you name it, I've handled it. But what I'm about to tell you isn't something I ever thought I'd have to process, let alone put into words. Yet here I am, weeks later, still shaking when I think about it. It happened while I was hauling a load of lumber from northern Wisconsin to a distributor in Minneapolis. I just crossed the state line and was heading west on Highway 70, surrounded by dense dark pines on both sides. The moon was high, casting a pale light over the snow-covered ground. The cold had a bite to it that night, cutting through even the warmth of my cab heater. The road was empty, which wasn't unusual for the area at that hour. It was just past midnight, and the hum of my rig's engine was the only company I had. I liked it that way, most nights. Solitude is part of the job when you're a trucker, and I'd grown to appreciate the quiet. But that night, that quiet felt different. It wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive. I remember glancing at the dashboard. The temperature outside had dropped to a bone-chilling 10 degrees Fahrenheit. As I sipped lukewarm coffee from my thermos, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, a sudden, primal warning. I have learned to trust those feelings. You have to, when you're out here alone. I slowed down, my headlights slicing through the darkness. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just a shadow, something shifting across the road in the distance. But then the shape solidified. It was tall, taller than any human, and it moved with unnatural fluidity, like it didn't weigh a thing. The figure darted across the road and disappeared into the tree line on my right. My stomach twisted, a note of unease settling in as I slowed the rig to a crawl. My headlights caught the snow where it had crossed. Tracks, big ones, too big for a deer, too irregular for a bear. These were long, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed at me to keep going, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I pulled the truck to the side of the road, leaving the engine idling, and grabbed my flashlight. Stepping onto the cold night, I could feel the forest watching me. The silence was thick, pressing down on me like a weight. The tracks led into the trees, deep impressions in the snow. They were spaced far apart, like whatever made them had an enormous stride. I followed them just a few steps into the woods before my flashlight caught something. Eyes. They reflected the beam back at me, glowing an eerie yellow from the darkness. The rest of it was obscured by the shadows, but I could make out a hulking form, crouched low, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't an animal. It couldn't be. The shape was wrong, the posture too deliberate, too human. It moved then, shifting slightly, and I saw more of it. Broad shoulders covered in matted fur, long arms ending in hands or claws that dug into the ground. Its head was unmistakably canine, with pointed ears and a long snout. But those eyes, they were intelligent. They weren't the eyes of a wild animal. They were studying me. I stumbled back, the beam of my flashlight shaking as I tried to keep it in sight. The creature didn't charge, it didn't growl, it just stared, its head tilting slightly, almost like it was deciding what to do with me. That's when the wind picked up, rustling the branches above me. The sound broke whatever spell I'd been under. and I turned and bolted back to the truck. My boot slipped on the snow, and I nearly fell, but I didn't stop. The cab felt like a sanctuary when I slammed the door shut and locked it. I threw the truck into gear, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. My headlights swept over the woods as I turned back onto the road, and for a brief moment I saw it again, standing at the edge of the trees, tall, imposing, and utterly unearthly. Then it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. I didn't stop driving until I reached the truck stop about 40 miles away. My heart was still pounding as I pulled into the lot and killed the engine. The other truckers inside didn't ask questions when I stumbled in, pale and shaken. They'd seen that look before. Over greasy coffee and a cigarette I didn't even want, I overheard some chatter about local legends. A guy 2 stools down mentioned the Dogman, a creature said to haunt the forests of the Midwest. Half man, half wolf, an apex predator that only showed itself to the unlucky few. I didn't join the conversation, but I listened. Every word they said fit what I'd seen. I don't know what it was that night on Highway 70, and honestly, I don't want to. I haven't taken a route through those woods since, and I don't plan to. Some things are better left unseen, better left forgotten. But I'll tell you this. If you're ever out there, driving alone in the dead of night, and you feel that quiet settle over you, that heavy unnatural quiet, don't stop, don't look, just keep driving. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled. My name is Wade Cormick. I'm a long-haul trucker out of Spokane, Washington, and I've been hauling freight across the country for the better part of 20 years. I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, shadowy figures on the highway, weird lights in the sky, and folks that just give you the wrong vibe. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on a run through Michigan's Upper Peninsula last winter. It was late January, and I had picked up a load of industrial equipment in Detroit, heading up to Marquette. The Upper Peninsula in winter is no joke. Snow-packed roads, biting winds, and miles of dense, untamed forests that seem to stretch into oblivion. It's beautiful in the daylight, but during the evening, it's another beast entirely. The trip started fine enough. I had the radio playing low, the hum of my engine keeping me company. The snow had been coming down steady all evening, but the roads weren't too bad. Around midnight, I hit a particularly isolated stretch of highway, the kind where you don't see another car for hours. The sky was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the moon through the clouds, and the only light came from my headlights carving through the darkness. About an hour outside of Menacing, the first strange thing happened. I spotted what I thought was a deer, standing at the edge of the road. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a deer. It was standing on 2 legs. At first I thought maybe it was a hunter in one of those ridiculous ghillie suits. But then I noticed the size of it, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more, with a broad muscular build. Its head was wrong, long snout, pointed ears, and eyes that reflected the light like a predator's. I slammed on the brakes, the rig skidding slightly on the icy road. The thing just stood there, staring at me with those glowing eyes. My heart was hammering in my chest as I tried to process what I was looking at. Then, in a single fluid motion, it turned and bolted into the trees. I should have driven away, any sane person would have, but curiosity, or maybe just plain stupidity, got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight, threw on my jacket, and stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my face. I wanted to see the tracks, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. The snow was fresh, and the prints were clear, massive paw prints, easily twice the size of a wolf's, with deep claw marks. They led into the woods where the darkness seemed to swallow them whole. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, and that's when I heard it, a low guttural growl coming from the trees. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. That was all I needed to hightail it back to the truck. As I climbed into the cab, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. The thing was back, crouched low, just beyond the tree line, its eyes locked on me. My hands fumbled with the keys as I started the engine, the roar of the diesel breaking the silence. The creature didn't move, but I could feel its gaze burning into me as I pulled back onto the road. I didn't stop until I reached a truck stop near Marquette. My nerves were shot, but I knew I couldn't just ignore what I'd seen. Over a cup of terrible coffee, I started thinking about survival. I've always been a practical guy, and I wasn't about to let this encounter shake me to pieces without coming up with a plan. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, facing something that might not be fully of this world, here is what I figured out that night. Number 1. Stay in your vehicle. Your truck, car, whatever, it's your best defense. Creatures like this are built for the wild. They can outrun and outmaneuver you in a heartbeat. Your vehicle is your sanctuary. 2. Don't engage. Curiosity killed the cat, and it could kill you too. If you see something strange, don't investigate. Get out of there as quickly as safely as possible. Number 3. Carry protection. I'm not saying a gun will save you from something like this, but it's better than nothing. A flare gun can also be a lifesaver. Bright light and flare can scare off most predators, cryptid or otherwise. Number 4. Know your route. Always have a map handy and know where the nearest towns or truck stops are. Isolation is your enemy in situations like this. Number 5. Keep a survival kit. Basic first aid, water, high-calorie snacks, a knife, and a reliable flashlight can mean the difference between life and death. Number 6. Listen to your instincts. If something feels off, trust that feeling. Your gut knows more than you think. The rest of that trip was uneventful, but I'll never forget those eyes. I heard stories about dogman sightings in the Midwest, tales of a creature that's half man, half wolf, stalking the woods and terrifying anyone who crosses its path. I used to think they were just that, stories. Now, I'm not so sure. If you're ever out on a lonely stretch of road and the night feels just a little too quiet, remember this. There are things out there we don't understand, things that don't belong in our world. And if you're lucky, you'll never have to face them. But if you do, stay sharp, stay safe, and for the love of God, don't go into the woods. Thank you for listening, everyone. Have a good night.